Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about the Winnipeg Jets and what the trade deadline will look like for them. At this point, it kind of looks like the Jets are going to be sellers at the deadline. They currently have 48 points and are facing an uphill battle in the Western Conference right now. The Anaheim Ducks hold the final wildcard spot with 55 points. The Jets do have 3 games in hand on them. However, Edmonton has 53 points, Dallas with 52, and they all have 46 games played, the same as the Jets. And while, you could make the case that, the Jets could totally get into the playoffs, are only 7 points out with a little bit less than half a season to go, and while that's a totally okay point to make and totally possible, might I add, I just don't see it happening. With the coaching, to the lack of execution and consistency with this team, I just don't see that this team will make the playoffs, and if they do, they're getting bounced first round. There's no way they're competing with Colorado. The Jets are just not a playoff team this year, and I think that's okay. The Jets definitely did not meet expectations this year, and a lot of players did not play up to how they played last season. In the offseason, the Jets had traded for Brenden Dillon and Nate Schmidt, and while those works have been an improvement over guys like Tucker Poolman and Jordy Ben, it did not push the needle that much for the Winnipeg Jets. So I thought it would be fun to make a video of the top 5 trade candidates on the Winnipeg Jets currently. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Starting at number 5, we've got depth defenseman Nathan Beaulieu. The 29-year-old defenseman has been in 19 games this year, posting up only just 1 assist. Points are not what you're going to get from Nathan Beaulieu. You're thinking more of a penalty killer role on defense for him. I don't think Nathan Beaulieu is that strong of a defenseman, to be totally honest with you. He's strictly depth. I wouldn't imagine a team would want to have him in the top 6 for their defensive core. But if there is a team that needs a 7-8 D-man for the playoffs, I could totally see a team trading a 6th, maybe even as low as a 7 for Nathan Beaulieu. And he does take a $1.5 million cap hit. I don't see why the Jets wouldn't take anything they can get for him at this point. Probably not someone you're looking to have next year with the emergence of Dylan Samberg, Ville Heinola, and even Declan Chisholm. But I definitely think that Nathan Beaulieu is on his way out of Winnipeg. It won't be for much, but he will be moving on more than likely. Coming in at number 4, we've got Logan Stanley. At just 23 years old, you might wonder, why is Logan Stanley on this list? Isn't this someone that the Jets should work on maybe growing for the future? And while I don't know if the Jets will consider trading Logan Stanley, I do think that there are teams out there that may look at him and say, wow, this could be the last piece to our puzzle. A lot of teams are going to see 6'7" and only 23 years old and think, wow, this would be a fantastic guy to bring into our organization to grow, and we can turn him into, hopefully, the next Zdeno Chara. In my opinion, Logan Stanley is likely not going to be much more than a 5'6" defenseman. Absolute highest ceiling would be top 4, and I don't think he will ever be a top 4 defenseman, at least on a good team anyway. Logan Stanley has all the physical skills to be great and does possess a really good shot, but his lack of hockey IQ and just bonehead mistakes at times are just perplexing, and it's really holding him back from growing and making it to the next level in his game. The biggest challenge for Stanley now, if he wants to stay as a mainstay on the Jets, is he's going to have to outperform Dylan Samberg when he becomes healthy again. He's going to have to show that he can outperform Ville Heinola, which both those guys, in my opinion, have played head over heels better than Stanley this season. And even Declan Chisholm, who has only played 2 games in the NHL, he looks very comfortable, and I do think that Logan Stanley could be the odd man out. However, I do think that the Jets could find a lot of trade value in Logan Stanley, being only 23 years old. I don't really know what the grounds would be in terms of the trade market for him. I do think there would be a team out there that would throw out a second. I don't think that would be impossible. Just totally betting on potential and the fact that he's such a big-bodied defenseman. Some GMs and coaches and owners, they love that kind of thing. So I do think it's important for the Jets to know when to sell, and I think the time to sell Logan Stanley is either at the trade deadline or in the offseason when his value is likely at his highest. Logan Stanley has played around 20 minutes a night at times this year, And it's really shown that, okay, well, he is a guy that is capable of playing that amount of minutes, albeit not at an elite level or anything, but he can play those minutes. So it wouldn't surprise me if a team is willing to give up a higher price for him. Whether it's now or the offseason, I don't know, but I think that would be the smart move. Moving on to number 3, a little bit of a wild card, but I've got Brenden Dillon. Dillon is a defenseman who's got a goal and 12 assists so far on the season for the Jets. He is known more for his defensive game than his offensive game. He was a part of the big splash in the offseason where the Jets brought in Nate Schmidt and Brenden Dillon, obviously. And at the time, it seemed like a great move, and that Winnipeg would be a great fit for Brenden Dillon. And while he's looked okay at times, he just really hasn't been what the Jets thought they were going to get. He's a little bit inconsistent, a little bit all over the place. But with that said, he is 6'4", 220 pounds, and does play a physical style of hockey, which fits great in the playoffs. He is 31 years old. He does have 3 years left on his contract after this season, so there is a bit of term there, just over $4 million for Brenden Dillon. I do think if the Jets were to market him, he could be a very attractive piece in the trade market. You've got Ben Sherratt, who looks like he's going to demand a first-round pick. I think Brenden Dillon is far better than Ben Sherratt, but with how hyped up Ben Sherratt is, he's going to fetch a first and probably a prospect as well, if not a little bit more if it turns into a bidding war. But I do think that Brenden Dillon could fetch a similar return. I don't know if he'll fetch a first-round pick, given that he is older than Ben Sherratt, but I do think that there's definitely going to be a market. If the Jets choose to market Brenden Dillon, I think they could get a second-round pick back and maybe a B-level prospect, or maybe they look to do a player-for-player trade kind of thing, maybe a pick and a player. We'll see how that happens, but I do think the Jets should look at moving on from Brenden Dillon, if not at the deadline, in the offseason. I just think it makes sense because if the Jets are going to be a poor team this year, I don't see why they need a 31-year-old defenseman with an over $4 million cap hit on the roster. It just doesn't seem like that is going to be the recipe for success. When you have a guy like Dylan Samberg, when you have Ville Heinola, and you have Declan Chisholm, you do have to make room. And I do think that Brenden Dillon is the odd man out, unfortunately, in this situation. But I do think the Jets could fetch a good haul for him. Moving on to number 2, maybe one of the more obvious ones, 36-year-old Paul Stastny. Stastny is a very good player. He has 9 goals, 11 assists in 35 games this season. He is 36 years old, and if the Jets aren't to make a run, he is definitely one of the obvious ones that teams will be calling for. Middle six players are very sought after at the deadline. Paul Stastny can play wing, he can play center, he can play all over the place, so I don't think that it will be hard to find a suitor for him. And with guys like Claude Giroux probably going at the deadline for a lot more than a lot of teams will like to pay, I do think that Paul Stastny will be very attractive to teams maybe trying to get a bargain deal at the deadline. Now, Stastny is going to be a pure rental, and I don't see him fetching anything massive, but I do think at the top end, I think they could get a third or a second-round pick for him. I do think the way that it will go is he'll probably get dealt for a third-round pick and maybe a prospect. He's likely the most obvious one that I see the Jets moving on from, being at the age he is at 36. I think it's just time that Winnipeg moves on from Paul Stastny. Get the picks, get the prospects that you can, and let him have a cup run with the team. Maybe he goes to the Avalanche, maybe he goes back to the Blues, who knows, but it would be really cool to see him go back to one of the teams that he played for previously in his career and make a strong cup push. And now finally, coming in at number 1, Andrew Copp. Andrew Copp is definitely the most intriguing player that Winnipeg will be looking to shop at the deadline if they are sellers. The 27-year-old is a very versatile player. He can play on the penalty kill, he's serviceable on the power play, and he can move up and down your lineup if you need him on the first line. He can be a contributor, second line contributor, he can play center, he can play wing. If you want him to play a grindy role on the third line, he can do that as well. He's very intriguing, playing 46 games this year. He does have 28 points, 12 goals, and 16 assists. He's a guy that a lot of GMs are going to have circled on their trade boards. I do think that teams would kill for an Andrew Copp. He may not fetch what Claude Giroux can get for obvious reasons. He's not as good as a Claude Giroux, but he's a really good player that can play anywhere in your top 9, anywhere you need him to. and that versatility has a lot of value in the NHL. I think a lot of teams will be lining up for Andrew Copp, and I do think that the longer the Jets hold on to him, his value will rise. I don't think that a lot of teams are going to want to pay the price to get a Claude Giroux. Like I said earlier, maybe Paul Stastny's gone, maybe a lot of other options are gone, and you're left with Andrew Copp. I do think a lot of teams would trade for Andrew Copp. I mean, you see what has happened in the past when the Lightning had traded for Barclay Goodrow, and they played him on the fourth line. And I just kind of see that kind of road for Andrew Copp. I do think the Jets will get a first-round pick for him, maybe even more, depending on how the market is. But I would be shocked if it's anything less than a first-round pick. I think it would be okay if they got a second-round pick and a little bit of a better prospect, but it's probably going to be a first-round pick and maybe something else sprinkled in there for the Jets. So those were the top 5 Winnipeg Jets that the Jets should be looking to sell. Tell me what you think in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think the Jets should hold on to Dillon long term? Do you think that Logan Stanley should be a project for Winnipeg, or continue to be a project anyway? And what do you think of the position that the Jets are in right now? Do you think they'll go on a run? Do you think they're just going to continue losing? Do you think they should tank? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, everyone. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you next time. Have a great one.